The night he claimed her was meant to be a mistake. One night, one ritual, one lie to save a kingdom from its curse. A nameless girl, dragged from the glades beneath a blood moon to serve as the vessel no one was meant to survive. But when dawn came, his mark was gone from his chest and burning bright on hers. The wolves outside the palace bowed their heads. The priests whispered blasphemy. And Kyle Draven, Alpha King of the North, felt the curse that killed every Luna before her turn its gaze upon him. Now every heartbeat ties him closer to the woman he was meant to forget, and to the prophecy that says one of them must die before the moon rises again. Before the next moon rises, tell me, would you risk your crown for love? Comment your answer below, and subscribe to see what fate decides next. The blood moon rose like an omen, crimson light spilling over the sacred glades as every alpha in the realm gathered to renew the ancient vows that chained their wolves to reason. It was a night of power, not affection, of dominance, not tenderness. Kyle Draven stood at the center of it all, the youngest Alpha King in centuries, crowned too early, burdened by the curse that destroyed every mate his line had ever known. They said love was poison to his kind. They said the Luna of the Alpha King could never survive the claiming. His father's madness, his mother's grave, and the ash of 100 alliances proved them right. So when a trespasser was found on sacred ground, a girl with torn clothes, dirt-streaked skin, and eyes that glowed faintly under moonlight, Kale saw convenience, not danger. The priests called her perfect, a nameless vessel, a body to bear the ritual's burden, so the Alpha King need not risk his curse. He agreed, but when the guards shoved her into his tent, the air shifted. She didn't tremble, didn't bow, didn't flinch at his wolf's growl. Her silence was not fear, it was defiance. Name? He demanded. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Seren. Just that. No title, no plea. The rite began, blood to blood, breath to breath, power to power. And then, the impossible. The moon exploded in white flame. Wolves outside dropped to their knees. The air turned thick with the scent of burning silver. When Kale looked down, the mark that should have branded her as sacrifice had instead claimed her as his equal. His sigil, the wolf of the north, blazed across her shoulder, alive, luminous, and eternal. At dawn, they found him half-conscious, his power drained, and her heartbeat pulsing in rhythm with his own. No priest could explain it. No curse-breaker dared name it. They called it witchcraft. He called it a mistake. But when she stirred and whispered his full name, one no soul alive should know, Kale Draven understood something far worse than love had bound him. Something ancient. Something waiting. Something that would make him choose between his crown and the girl the gods had given back to him. He woke to the sound of wolves kneeling. Not howling, kneeling. A low, synchronized thud rolled through the encampment, like drums beaten by 1,000 paws. Kale jerked upright as the tent ropes sang in the wind and silver light bled through the seams. The air was wrong, too bright, too thin. Power crackled over his skin as if static had been braided into his veins. "Your Majesty!" A shadow tore through the flap and fell to one knee. Commander Ivar, scar down his jaw, eyes blown wide. Forgive the intrusion. The pack. There. I've never seen. Kael's reply died when he looked to his left. She lay where the moon had left her, on the woven furs, hair tangled like ink, cheek soft against the back of her hand. The mark, his mark, burned at the slope of her shoulder, bright as a brand and yet not raw at all. It pulsed with his heartbeat. He felt it, the pull and return, the echo like a second drum inside his ribs. Out, he said, voice low, the wolf in it too close to the surface. Post a ring. No one enters without my word. Ivar vanished, the tent flap whispering shut. Kael reached for the woman before he realized his hands were shaking. He didn't touch the sigil. He didn't have to. The air above it was warmer, alive. Seren, she had said. A name like a bell struck inside a chapel. He swung his legs from the furs and tried to stand. The surge hit like lightning. Power knifed up his spine, white-hot and feral. And every object in the tent shuddered. Bases quivering, spear hafts rattling in their racks, the iron brazier coughing sparks like startled birds. Kael caught himself on the center pole and rode the wave until it passed. Cold sweat gathered under his hair. Outside, wolves whined, not in fear, in reverence. He hated it. Your Majesty, the high priest's voice carried like incense. Sweet, smothering. Sorek shoved past the guards with a clutch of acolytes, his throat glinting with rings of moon metal. He skidded to a stop when he saw the sigil on Seren's shoulder, his lips thinning to a white line. By the first vows, he breathed. Blasphemy! 3 curse breakers in blue followed, their gloves waxed with protective oils, their talismans chiming like rain. They took one look at the mark and stalled in place, as if the floor had turned to ice. Well? Kael rasped. Explain it. The eldest curse breaker swallowed. We cannot, sire. You cannot or you dare not. Both. His mouth twitched. That sigil should exist only in your blood. It is not ink. It is not a burn. It is as if the moon has written on living flesh. Sorek found his voice. There is an answer, he said, eyes hungry. Witchcraft. Kael moved without thought. In 3 steps he had the priest gripped by the front of his robes and pinned against the tent pole. The brazier's coals flared, seeing his anger and answering it. Choose your words with the care of a man who requires his tongue, Kael said softly. Sorek's rings clinked against his collarbone. Your Majesty, with reverence, this is an omen. The right has never. This was my right. And the god took it from you. Sorek whispered, plain as dawn. The surge rose again. Pain, heat, the taste of metal on Kael's tongue. He released the priest before his temper did worse and braced his hands on his thighs until the world steadied. When he lifted his head, all those eyes were waiting. The guards, the priests, the blue-liveried scholars, even the acolyte too young to be here choking on fear. They wanted him to make sense of the impossible, to restore the order the moon had just unstitched. He stared at the woman and found nothing but a gravity that made no sense. Close the camp, he said. Break the altars. Douse the braziers. No more rites today. Sorik sputtered. Sire, the Alphas. The Alphas will bend to the king they swore to. If they will not, they can try their teeth on mine. Ivar reappeared. The council rides from the capital, he reported. Word spread fast the moment the sky flared. Advisor Thorn leads them. Malric Thorn, loyal as a blade in the back. Kael's jaw ticked. We return to the palace, he said. His gaze slid to the mark and back. With her. The journey felt like traveling inside a lit fuse. All the way down the mountain road, the wolves padded along the ridges and the ravines, never howling, never breaking pace, gazes lowered when the litter passed. Farmers halted mid-load in the fields to stare with their mouths open. A child dropped her pail at the verge and laughed in delight when the royal pack bowed to the sleeping woman, as if she were watching a trick. Even the wind held its breath. At the city gates, bells clanged the warning reserved for war or miracles. And by the time Kael reached the high court, the great hall had already bloomed with witnesses. Half the council in travel-stained cloaks, merchants craning from the colonnades, priests in their best grief. And in the front, Malric Thorn, clean as a coin. He had the gift of looking tired at precisely the moments he needed to look sincere. My king, Malric said, stepping forward with his hands parted, humble to the point of insult. The capital felt the tremor. I prayed you would be... His eyes slid to the woman in the guard's arms. That is where the prayer ended. What have you brought into our house? Kael dismounted, every nerve a live wire. The result of a rite your priest swore would not bind her, he said. You wanted an answer, it answered differently. Sorik moved like a viper toward the center of the hall, drawing the crowd's appetite along with him. What the king means, he announced in a voice sweet enough to rot teeth, is that he was deceived. By a witch. The mark is proof. Proof of her death. A councillor barked. Or yours. A murmur swelled. Fear loved to be fed. Kael lifted a hand and the room obeyed. None of you will label what you do not understand, he said. Not in my hall. Malric's gaze flicked from the sigil to Kael's face, reading the strain, calculating. He was too wise to press openly. The law is older than all of us, he said gently. If a woman bears the king's mark, and the king's line is cursed, he let the sentence dangle like a noose. We are already past the first hour of the first day. Before the next full moon, the bond must be cut. By killing her, he did not need to add. Kael looked at the faces, some frightened, some triumphant, none curious enough to ask why. It's why the wolves had bowed. His chest felt too small. The woman goes to the inner cells, he said. She will be guarded and unharmed. I will question her myself. Sorik's mouth opened. Sire, speak again, and I will cut out your reverence and feed it to the dogs. Kael stepped close enough that Malric had to tilt his chin to keep their eyes level. And you will remember, he added, too softly for the eavesdroppers on the balcony, that your counsel ends at my crown. For a heartbeat, Malric's smile bore vanished, and something colder showed through. Then he bowed, perfect as a practiced lie. As you wish, Majesty. Kael left them to their murmuring and led the way down. The inner cells were not the dungeon the court whispered about to frighten sons into obedience. They were quieter, older, cut into the mountain under the palace like ribs carved from stone. Moon iron barred the doors. The torches burned low and steady, spitting every now and then as if annoyed to be awake. They laid Seren on a cot in the cleanest cell and pulled the lattice door into place with a clang. Her lashes trembled. Colour was returning to her mouth. The sigils shimmered faintly in the torchlight, every line precise. No seam, no smear. As if the skin had been born around it and around it. Clear the hall, Cale said. Ivar hesitated. Alone? My wolf is not the danger here. Majesty, outside, Cale repeated. And if any priest comes within 10 paces, tear his beads off and make him count them. The footsteps receded until only the slow drip of mineral water ticked in the distance. Cale stood at the bars and watched the woman breathe. He did not know what he had expected of the one the moon had chosen to embarrass him. Terror-struck beauty? A wickedness to justify fear? There was none of that here. Only a wildness he could not name and a quiet that did not belong to his world. You have made enemies, he told the sleeping figure, voice low so the stone would keep it. I have made a life of mine. If you are a witch, you chose a poor king. If you are not, then I do not know what you are. Her fingers twitched toward her shoulder because his hand had, unconsciously, mirrored the movement. He dropped it to his side. The surge rose again, irritable, electric, and he took a backward step to keep it from turning into something that would frighten the guards. He should have called for the curse breakers. He should have summoned his mother's oldest midwife, who had known all the stories before the court scraped them clean. He should have marched straight back to the hall and forced the Sorek to kneel on salt until his knees bled for the word witch. Instead, he stood looking at a stranger's mouth and felt 14 years old, standing at a window that refused to open, beating his fists softly against the glass. The power in him shifted. It wasn't another surge. It was a tug. A thread being drawn through a needle's eye, somewhere between his heart and hers. He closed his eyes and listened to the shape of it. A memory he did not own unfurled like a scroll. Fire in the trees, white wolves lowering their heads. The moon, a coin spinning above a river. A voice, not his, not hers, whispering through red leaves. The moon takes what the blood denies. His eyes snapped open. What did you remember? He asked, absurd. Quiet. What did you see? Seren's lashes fluttered. She wasn't awake. Not quite. Her lips parted and formed a word he could not hear. The mark at her shoulder pulsed once, twice, timed to his own pulse. He dragged the chair closer to the bars and sat, ignoring the way the iron complained. If you are a fisher of kings, he said dryly, because dry was all that kept him from sounding afraid. You've cast your net well, but you should know what bites. No answer. Only the small push-pull of breath. He stayed until the torch burned an inch lower. The weight of the court above him grew heavier, like a hand pressing the crown down. At last he stood. You'll have guards who answer to me alone, he said. Food. Water. If Sorek sends you an exorcist, yell. I will hear you. The corner of her mouth moved. A not quite smile. Or a reflex. He told himself he imagined it. Keys rattled as he reached for the door latch. Iron kissed iron. The sound echoed down the tunnel like a snapped string. Cale, she murmured. Not Majesty. Not King. Cale. He went very still. His name. given back to him in the voice of a woman who had never been presented at court. He turned slowly. Her eyes were closed. Her brow was smooth. Sleep held her like water holds a stone. "Say it again," he said. A fool. Her throat worked. The whispers slid out into the torchlight, the second name tucked inside the first like a secret folded in a sleeve. The one only his mother and the midwife who sealed his cradle knew. Cael Auren Draven, she breathed, soft, reverent, as if reciting an old blessing. The torches guttered and flared. He stood in the orange light with his hand on the lock and felt the axis of his life take a degree's turn. A small thing, enough to send a ship to a different shore. Footsteps approached at a respectful distance. Ivar's voice, "Majesty, the council presses for word." Cael blinked. The tunnel returned, stone, iron, a woman with his mark who knew his hidden name. He weighed her life against the crown and found the crown lighter than it had ever been. "Tell them the king is not finished praying," he said. He drew the bolt back into place, left the guard with orders to break fingers before following priests, and climbed toward the light, toward Malric's smile and Sorek's beads, and a city about to discover it had a queen, whether it wanted one or not. Seren's first breath tasted like iron and rain, stone ceiling, low torch, the slow tick of water somewhere beyond the bars. She did not move at first. She listened, the way you listen when you're not sure the world will let you belong to it again. The cell smelled of damp and clean straw, of oiled hinges and moon iron. But beneath all of that, threaded through like a vein, came a rhythm not her own. Thud. Pause. Thud. She pressed her palm to her breastbone, half expecting to feel a bruise. Her heart answered. The other one answered with it. Two pulses, layered and stubbornly in step, as if someone had braided drums together in the dark. She sat up too quickly, the room tilting on its axis. The mark on her shoulder warmed in warning. Memory stuttered through her like firelight through slats. Silver trees. Wolves lowering their heads. A man with a crown in his eyes and a curse in his blood. And a whisper that wasn't a voice at all. Old as frost. The moon takes what the blood denies. Footsteps halted outside her cell. The soldier who appeared was all scar and discipline. His gaze fastened just over Seren's shoulder, as if looking directly at the sigil would be impolite or dangerous. "Water," he said gruffly, pushing a cup through the hatch. "Brett, the king—" He seemed to change his mind. "Call if you need." "Your name?" she asked. He blinked. As if no one had asked him that down here in years. "Kellen?" "Thank you, Kellen." Same. Her voice was roughened rope. She sipped, the cold cutting through cotton in her mouth. And when the water hit her stomach, the second heartbeat eased. It was absurd to be grateful to water for forgiving you. She was. In the silence after he left, she tried to count the things that were still true. Her own name, though it felt suddenly both too small and too loud. The scar on her knee from the summer she fell out of a hayloft. The way the moon had always made her restless and kinder. And this new thing, the double rhythm under her ribs, that undid every law she'd been taught to obey. She looked down at the mark. No raised edge, no blistered skin. The lines lay under the surface like riverbeds, discovered when drought strips a lake bear die. Bright and exact in the torchlight. If she angled her shoulder just so, the wolf's eyes seemed to flash. She reached toward it, then stopped, hand hovering. It felt less like possession than a question answered. What are you? Alive, she thought. Against odds you do not understand. The outer hall stirred. Voices, muted, respectful, and an argument under blankets. A key turned. The door at the end of the corridor opened and closed softly. And then he came. The man she had seen in shards. Night, oath, pain hoarded like winter grain in the lines beside his mouth. Crownless now, dressed in dark leather still dusted with the road. His hair damp from either rain or discipline. He stopped a pace from the bars and looked at her as if she were an equation he did not trust but could not ignore. Seren, he said. Hearing her name in his mouth should not have felt like anything. It did. She kept her face arranged anyway, the way she had taught herself, calm on the surface, even if the glacier under the water was splitting. Kay, she returned. The small defiance of leaving titles out sat between them like a warm stone in snow. A muscle in his jaw flickered, not in offense but as if the name fit and surprised him. How do you feel? Thirsty? Hungry? Extremely terrestrial? She tilted her head, strangely double. His attention sharpened. Double. Mine. She tapped lightly at her sternum. And she let the second rhythm thud. Yours. Silence blew out the torch for a beat. He did not step closer, but the air between them thinned, as if distance had agreed not to be rude. You feel it, he said. I feel you. She lifted a shoulder. The wolf there brightened and dimmed, the light timed to his pulse. Do you? His gaze flicked to the sigil and back. Every time it glows, something in me answers. He exhaled once, a sound like the first scrape of steel from a scabbard. This should not be possible. Most things worth surviving shouldn't be. He huffed a laugh he didn't grant entirely the dignity of laughter. Your presence in my inner cells has encouraged an outbreak of scholars. They would like to measure you, name you, and reduce whatever you are to a word they can bless or burn. And you. I would like to know why I woke with half the palace bowing. Half. The wolves counted as more. At that, the corner of her mouth moved. They don't bow to crowns, she said softly, only to kin. Something uncoiled low in his throat. He looked away first, and she watched the muscles in his back consider the door and refuse it. This bond. He gestured between them, a clean-cutting motion that betrayed the swordsman. I will try to sever it. You sound very certain. I cannot uphold the law and keep you breathing if the law says your breath kills me. Does it? He opened his mouth, closed it. When he answered, the words were as honest as a blade. I don't know. The rite was meant to swallow you whole. You're sitting in front of me. Perhaps you misread the appetite. That almost smile quirked again and disappeared like a small animal, deciding it had tempted fate enough. He lifted his hand to the lock. Eat, he said. Rest. At moonrise, the ritual. Which ritual? The oldest we retain. He hesitated just long enough to admit he did not like invoking it. Severance. The ritual chamber smelled of myrrh and metal. A circle of inlaid moon iron gleamed in the flagstones. 4 curse breakers took positions at the cardinal points, faces masked in white linen painted with sigils, hands sheathed to the wrist in waxed gloves. Sorek had been barred by Kael's order. Malrich had not. He stood with the quiet poise of a man prepared to claim either outcome as his idea. Seren stepped into the circle without waiting to be dragged. The mark warmed. The iron hummed faintly, the same single high note you hear when a finger finds the perfect curve of a crystal's edge. Kael did not look away from Seren to glance at the curse breakers. "Speak it," he said. The eldest intoned, "By iron and night, by oath and ash, we call back what was given without vow. We break what was bound without witness. We sever what was made without name." Seren listened to the words the way a wolf listens to a trap. Curious, cautious, unwilling to test spring tension with a paw. The wax smell thickened. Heat built behind her eyes. Not tears, but pressure. She felt Kael across the circle, like a lighthouse feels a storm. Upright, battered, refusing to dim. The curse breakers raised their hands in unison. Pain lanced through her. Bright, clean, threaded with cold. Not from the mark, from the space between the beats. Something older than language tugged at that woven rhythm, under her ribs, and tried to pull the knots free. Kael staggered. The royal guards flinched. Malrich didn't so much as blink. The curse breakers continued, voices braided. "Return," they chanted. "Return, return." "No," Seren said, not loudly, but the word hit the iron like a stone in water. Ripples crossing the circle and bouncing back. The pain sharpened. Kael gripped the edge of the inlaid metal, refusing to kneel to steel. The candle flames guttered and lengthened, blue tongues rising from white wicks. Somewhere in the palace above them, wolves began to snarl. Not vicious, not afraid. Warning. "Return," the curse breakers insisted, strained now, sweat beading on their temples beneath the linen. The mark grew hotter, the iron under Seren's bare feet changed song. The humming note going flat, as if the circle itself had realized it was not the superior instrument in this room. "Enough," Kael grated, eyes flashing wolf-light through the pain. "Stop." The eldest curse-breaker dropped his hands in relief so profound it left him swaying. The drag in Seren's chest ceased so abruptly, her vision went bright at the edges. She put her hand against the wall to steady herself and felt, under the cool stone, the same double beat, hers, his, resume its matched march. The chamber breathed again, all at once. The guards, the candles, even Malrich, if breath could be a soundless smirk. The eldest whispered hoarse through linen. "It will not sever." "I noticed," Kael said, and wiped blood from his lip with the back of his wrist, as if he resented the evidence of vulnerability. Malrich inclined his head, the gesture polite enough to be insolence. "Then we must restore order another way." "Another way," Kael repeated thoughtfully, as if tasting poison and cataloguing notes. We will call that way later." He stepped out of the circle and offered Seren his hand without thinking about the optics. Her palm found his. Heat met heat. The mark cooled as if soothed. One of the curse breakers made a small involuntary sound like a student seeing a demonstration that should be impossible. "Back to the cells," Kael told the room, which pretended to be command and was actually retreat. He looked at Seren. "Walk." She did. Each step sang in the iron. Word did what word does. It ran. By mid-afternoon, no servant in the kitchens kept a rumour to a whisper, and no noble in the garden lowered a voice for the sake of a hedge. The witches of the Vale had risen. The king's power had been stolen. A peasant's trick, a divine omen, a test, a catastrophe, a miracle, a queen, a plague, the same sentence, braided a dozen ways by different mouths. Seren heard some of it through the grate that let in a sliver of courtyard sky. The rest arrived in the shape of the behaviour. The god who normally grew sullen by fourth bell brought bread he had no leave to share. Two laundresses shook their heads at the cell door and whispered, "Pretty poor thing," and "Priests will eat her," and left a ribbon anyway, because what else can a laundress offer a woman who might be a myth but a piece of colour against stone? And then, just before dusk, it came. Soft pads on stone. A breath of wild just shy of rain. Wolves in the corridor. Kellen swore once under his breath, reverent. "Easy," he told the pack, though none had bared a tooth. The largest of them, a dark-coated female with one white ear, stepped to the bars and lowered her head until her eyes found Seren's through iron. Something ancient rolled in Seren's bones and stood up. The pack sank as one. Not prostrate, that was for throne. This was lower, older, a gesture kept from time before halls and crowns and language. Kellen's hand, hovering near his sword purely because habit has to settle somewhere, fell back to his side. "They've never done that for a human," he said softly. "I'm not," Seren answered, then realized how it sounded. "Not only. How are you only anything now, Kakener?" Kellen murmured. But it wasn't unkind. The wolves stayed until the torches guttered, then vanished as quiet as mist. It took an hour for the priests to notice. It took Sorik a minute to arrive and 2 to call it proof of possession. By then Kale had come down the steps 2 at a time, boots quick on stone. "Send them away," Soreke said, trembling with the conviction of a man who confuses noise with power. "They defile the holy corridors." "They built the holy corridors," Kyle said evenly, and did not slow. "You defile them with your voice." He hated himself for the way some of his anger felt like relief. In a world that insisted on returning to him with questions he could not answer, it felt good to have a man he was permitted to threaten. When Sorik had been peeled off and the corridor fell back into the quiet kind of breathing, Kale stood looking at Seren through the bars, and he did not know what to do with the expression on his face. It wasn't kingly. It wasn't tender. It was the look of a man who has just discovered an enemy has a pulse, and that the pulse's tempo matches his. "Tell me something true," he said. It was almost a plea. She considered him, not ungently. "When you train with the blade, you nick your left thumb on the third pass and pretend you meant to," she said. "When you dream, you walk through a hall with no doors and call it duty because the other words would break you. When you were 10, your mother sang you a song about a white stag and warned you not to look for it because you would find it and then be sorry you had." He went very still. "How? I see through your eyes when you sleep." She didn't soften it. Softening insults the truth and the person you intend it for. "Sometimes when you wake, I'm still there." He lost the breath he meant to draw. "And you, through yours?" "Fire and bark. teeth and grief. A field where iron lies like fallen constellations. The taste of a word you don't allow yourself to say twice in a day. Mine. She held his gaze. I think you are lonelier than your enemy's hope. He looked away first. Again. The wolf in him did not like the habit. The man did not care. If the bond cannot be severed, I can make it bearable, he said, as if he could talk a hurricane into staying downwind. I can distance, starve it. From which end? She asked. The question was not cruel. It was precise. He did not answer. Days fell into a rhythm that was not peace and still managed to be a song. Mornings, the palace woke with rumors, and the wolves patrolled under balconies with their ears pointed forward, a line of moving grey punctuation. Afternoons, Kael trained with his captains until sweat shone on the cords of his arms, and the soldiers pretended not to see the small flinch when the blade opened a shallow cut on his thumb, and, far below ground, a woman in a cell touched her shoulder as if burned. Evenings, Malric visited with reports that were news-shaped and conversations that were traps. He spoke carefully of unrest in the south, a temple's doors painted with curses in ash, a border lord sending back the tithe with a note that read only, "Bewitched kings do not hold my oath." The words were kindling. He offered them with both hands and the grace of a man who keeps the matches in his sleeve. Kael listened and did not light anything, not yet. Nights, the dreams changed. The hall with no doors sprouted windows. In one, he saw a snowfield with footprints that stopped as if the person had been lifted. In another, he saw ruin covered in moonflowers. In a third, he saw a young boy smiling without a front tooth. And though he did not know the child, his heart recognized the ache of a future he would never ask for, because asking would require hope. He woke with Seren's palm flat to the stone and his own palm flat to the floor, separated by distance and stubbornness and iron. On the fourth evening, he found her cell already lit with moonlight. It came down the stairwell like a river, pooled through the grate, and lay along the bars in ribbons. She sat cross-legged on the cot, hair unbound, face upturned. A ribbon someone had threaded through the bars lay on her knee, blue being dotted against brown. "Rumor says you stole my power," he said by way of greeting. "Have you come to return it, thief?" "What would you do with it?" she asked, "if it turned out to be something other than what you thought it was?" "Use it anyway." "Honest," she said, and something like warmth touched her mouth. "Good. Honesty wastes less time." He leaned a shoulder into the stone. "I have been honest enough to learn I may be wrong," he said. "That is a particularly vexing discovery for a king." "For a person," she corrected gently. "Kings are only particularly public people." He eyed the moonlight on the floor, how it refused the grout lines as if order bored it. "If my Luna is fated to die," he said, not flinching as he said the word, "why do you live?" The question hung between them like a bell that had been waiting years to be struck. Seren breathed through it. She did not answer with theology or defiance. She answered with a simple, stubborn truth. "Because I'm supposed to." She tipped her head toward the ribbon of light. "Because something older than your law and my fear decided I was enough this time." She lifted her hand. The mark warmed under her skin, answering an unseen call. "Because your bloodline has been starving itself, and the moon is tired of watching you gnaw your own hearts." He laughed, one clean, shocked sound, young for a heartbeat. "You are very inconvenient to condemn. You are very inconvenient to hate." They stood that way until the torches sighed down another inch. Outside, the city softened into evening, the sharp edges of commerce blunted by food and tiredness, and the relief of reaching the part of a day where you are permitted to say your truest sentence out loud to no one. From the barracks yard came the ring of steel, the slide of whetstone, the barked command of a drill master with affection hiding under his scorn. A shout, then a clatter. Kael's head turned. Too quick, too trained, a soldier had misjudged a parry. The blade kissed Kael's forearm, shallow but bright. He didn't curse. He didn't need to. Sant, the blacksmith's son, made the sound for him. Below, Seren hissed and clapped a hand to her shoulder. The burn flared and faded. When she lowered her palm, her fingers were clean. Kael looked down through stone and distance at a woman he could not see, and Seren looked up through bars and rock at a man she knew by the way the air changed when his blood warmed. Something in both of them acknowledged the economy of that exchange. No wasted motion, no wasted pain. "Stop cutting yourself to prove you can bleed," she said. He couldn't hear her. She said it anyway. Later, when the palace had unlatched its jaw and fallen asleep. When even Malric had closed his ledger and pretended to dream of peace. Kael walked the lower corridors alone. No guards trailed him. He had dismissed them with a look even the most faithful found wise to respect. He stood by the bars without speaking. Seren did not ask why. The moon had climbed to the grate and poured herself through. Light lay in bright coins on the floor. Seren's eyes unfocused, not away from him, but into some old distance. Her lips parted. She hummed, soft, simple, a tune that wore its age like grace rather than dust. 4 notes climbed and fell. 4 answered. A 5th reached for something that would not be there if you sang the song wrong and found it anyway. Kael's hand closed around the iron until it squealed. He had not heard that melody since the night before his mother died. "Where did you—" His voice broke on the 2nd word and refused the 3rd. Her gaze came back to him, moonslow. "I don't know," she said. She touched her sternum as if to be polite to a stranger at a door. "From here, from you, from before." He was standing before he knew he'd moved. The iron between them suddenly intolerable. The wolf in him pressed forward, not with hunger, not with danger, with a need as pure as a pilgrim's, to be nearer to the thing that made the ache stop for 4 notes. "That was my mother's," he said, each syllable an oath as much as a fact. Seren's mouth curved, not in triumph, but in recognition. "Then I suppose," she murmured, "it's ours." He did not take her hand. He did not drop the bars. He did nothing rash. Nothing that could be engraved later as the moment a king forgot the weight of his crown. He stood and listened while she hummed the lullaby the world had stolen from him, and given back through a woman the world had already sentenced. Above them, somewhere behind a door with a lock disguised as art, Malric Thorne paused in his writing, as if a draft had found a crack, and frowned. "Again?" Kaelu said, when the last note settled. Seren hummed once more, and the moon, delighted with the symmetry of it, poured a little brighter through the grate. Outside, the wolves lifted their heads as if at a bell. The city slept through a miracle and would wake to swear it had dreamed of softer things. When the song ended, The double rhythm under Seren's ribs settled into the quiet kind of together. Kael exhaled, the ache behind his breastbone easing in a way he would not allow language to cheapen. He stepped back from the bars before he did something the council could justify burning a city to correct. "Rest," he said roughly. "And you, Kael Arindravan?" Seren returned, and this time his private name felt not like a secret broken, but like a bridge built, plank by plank, over a ravine both of them had grown old walking around. He left the cell with the lullaby still breathing the air, climbed toward a hall with too many doors that all led to power, and wondered if a curse could be wrong. What else in his world could be rewritten? Above ground, under moonlight, the royal pack circled the palace once and bowed their heads towards the stone. In the chapel, Sorik prayed too loudly, as if the god were hard of hearing. In a quiet room with long windows and longer memory, Malric sealed a letter and pressed his signet into cooling wax. By morning, the city would have a new rumour to adore. The witch did not steal the king's power. She was teaching his heart to remember its own. Dawn never reached the chamber where Seren slept. Even when the palace above blazed with morning light, the air beneath remained a breathless twilight. It was safer that way. For her. For everyone. Kael told himself he visited only to question her, to measure the threat, to understand what ancient madness had written his sigil into her skin. But when the guard opened the cell each day, his pulse would quicken in time with hers. That was the first lie he learned to live with. "Come with me," he said, voice rough from disuse. Seren looked up from her cot. The mark on her shoulder shimmered faintly where light touched it. "Am I to be judged or buried?" "Neither," Kael replied. "You're going to tell me what you are." He led her through the lower corridors, past guards who tried and failed not to bow. Her chains clinked softly, though he'd ordered them loose enough not to bruise. The air grew colder as they descended. The walls changed from carved marble to living rock, etched with veins of silver that pulsed like slow lightning. "Where are we going?" she asked. "To the beginning," he said, "the temple of the first wolves." Her steps faltered. That place was sealed after the blood wars. "It opens for kings," Kael said, "and apparently for curses." When they reached the final gate, two statues of kneeling wolves flanked the threshold, their eyes inlaid with moonstone. As Kael approached, the stones flickered, alive, aware. The gate opened with a sigh, dust spiraling into the air like breath. The corridor ahead was lined with murals worn by time. Gold leaf clung in patches to scenes of wolves and women, of battles and vows. The farther they walked, the warmer the air grew, heavy with the scent of myrrh and rain, an old, holy scent. Seren's pulse quickened in Kael's chest before she even touched the walls. The murals told stories no book dared to preserve. Women crowned in moonlight stood beside kings crowned in fire. Wolves circled their feet, not as beasts, but as guardians, eyes luminous, reverent. The art was older than kingdoms, older than curses. Seren stopped before a mural half hidden behind the roots of a stone tree. She reached out, brushing the dust from its surface. Beneath her fingers, a crest emerged, silver and blue, a rising moon cupped in a field of stars. Her breath caught. "I've seen this before." Kael tilted his head. "Where?" "In my dreams," she whispered. Or someone's. The instant her palm lattened against the sigil, light burst from the wall. Cold, silver, pure. The temple shuddered, releasing a breath it had held for centuries. Kael staggered back, hand instinctively reaching for his blade. The light flooded Seren's veins, tracing her like rivers of moonfire. Images slammed through her mind. Women kneeling beside burning kings, their hands pressed to bleeding hearts. Wolves bowing as white-robed priestesses spoke the ancient vows. A circle of silver flames encasing a man crowned with iron, screaming as light poured from his eyes. And at the center of it all, a single name carved into the earth like a wound. House Vale. Seren gasped and stumbled. Kael caught her before she fell. Her fingers trembled against his chest, his heartbeat and hers colliding again, refusing to separate. "My family?" she whispered. "The crest. It's ours. House Vale." Kael frowned. "There is no House Vale. Not in any record." "There was," she said. "We were erased." The visions continued to claw through her mind, centuries unraveling in seconds. "We were the Lunaris bloodline," Seren said, voice trembling with awe and grief. "Healers, seers, bound to the moon's light. We calmed the rage of alphas, balanced their strength with reason. Every king had a veil beside him. Until the first Alpha King tried to break the pact." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Break it how?" "He wanted power without temperance, control without compassion. So he slaughtered us, all who carried the Lunaris blood. He made the curse you call your legacy, a curse that kills every Luna. He used our blood to bind it." Her voice fractured. "My ancestors died to stop him, and the moon she remembered." Kael stepped closer, his breath cold and sharp in the flickering air. "You're saying the curse was forged, not given?" Seren met his gaze, unflinching. "It was forged in blood and greed. The gods didn't curse you, Kael. Your own line did." The words landed like blades between them. For the first time, Kael looked truly afraid, not of her, but of what she made possible. If the curse was man-made, it could be undone. If it could be undone, then everything his family had built, every law, every vow, every death, had been for nothing. The ground trembled. Somewhere deep within the temple, stone cracked like ice breaking on a lake. The murals rippled with motion, walls shifting, rising from the walls, eyes blazing with spectral fire. They circled Seren, their ghostly forms brushing her like wind. Kael drew his sword, but the nearest wolf bowed. Its translucent head dipped until its muzzle touched the hem of Seren's robe. "Stand down," she whispered. "They're not here to harm." "How do you know?" "Because they remember me." The wolves turned their eyes to Kael. He felt their gaze pierce through his armor, past the human mask, down to the thing with teeth inside his soul. The alpha in him stirred and knelt. His knees hit the ground before he realized what he was doing. The temple flared white. In the brilliance, Kael saw the first Alpha King, the ancestor whose curse had damned them all, standing before a woman with hair of silver light. She bore Seren's face. Her voice echoed across time. "You chained the moon to your blood, but forgot. The moon does not bow, she chooses." The image fractured like glass under strain. Seren fell to her knees, clutching her head. Kael caught her shoulders again, grounding her with the steadiness of his touch. When the light dimmed, the murals were changed. The crest of House Vale now glowed openly, moon and stars, bright as a heartbeat. Beneath it, words were carved into stone, newly visible where dust had hidden them for generations. Seren read them aloud, voice shaking but clear. The false king's bond will end when the true Luna rises. The temple fell silent. Even the air seemed to listen. Kael stared at the inscription, every instinct warring inside him. The false king, he said slowly. You think it means me? No, Seren said, still kneeling. It means every king who believed his crown was stronger than the bond meant to guide it. The first, the ones after, the curse doesn't end with your death, it ends with your choice. My choice? She nodded, eyes silver in the torchlight. To love what you were taught to fear. To trust what you were told to destroy. Kael sheathed his sword. Then why me? Why now? Because the moon is patient, Seren said softly. But even patience runs out. As they turned to leave, the final mural shifted again, this time of its own accord. The silver flames flared brighter, wrapping the chamber in light so pure it stripped color from the world. Seren stood still, eyes wide as the wolves howled in unison. A haunting, beautiful sound that shook dust from the ceiling. Her mark glowed through the fabric on her shoulder, bright enough to cast shadows on the wall. Kael reached for her, but the light pushed him back. The words of the prophecy burned themselves into the stone, molten and alive. When blood and moon are one again, the curse shall bow before the heart. The false king's bond will end when the true Luna rises. Then the light dimmed. The wolves faded. The air grew still. Kael exhaled, slow and deliberate. Oh, it seems, he said, voice hoarse. The moon has chosen her queen. Seren turned to him, pale, trembling, but resolute. And now the kingdom must choose whether it will burn for her. They climbed back toward the surface in silence, the prophecy echoing behind them like a heartbeat in stone. When they reached the gate, Kael glanced back one last time. The crest of House Vale glowed faintly on the mural, defying centuries of erasure. Seren's fingers brushed his arm. You feel it too, don't you? She asked quietly. He nodded. The bond? She whispered, the truth waking. And as they stepped into the open air, the wolves on the palace walls lifted their heads to the sky and howled. Not in mourning this time, but in recognition. The true Luna had risen. The day the rumor reached the High Council, the bells of the White Keep rang the wrong hour. They were meant for noon, full-bodied and certain. Instead, they told an uneven, staggering peal that shivered the doves from the eaves and sent the market into a hush. Even the wolves along the outer ramparts pricked their ears and stared toward the citadel, as if sound itself had stumbled over a stone it had never seen before. In the council chamber, Malric Thorn smiled like a man who had watched the stone being set. Your Majesty, he said gently, hands folded in his sleeves, we have received troubling illumination. The woman you shelter bears the crest of House Vale. Across the crescent table, priests in moon-grey vestments shifted, their rings rattling against the polished ashwood. Generals in iron-banded leather sat straighter, knuckles blanching over sword pommels. The chamber smelled of cold frankincense and something sour underneath. Fear with a varnish. Chael stood at the head of the table and did not sit. He had not slept since the temple. The bond throbbed in his chest with Seren's pulse. Every breath of his was a mirrored echo of hers. The knowledge of her bloodline had not shocked him, only the scope of the lie he had inherited. He wore the truth like a bruise under armor. The crest is real, Chael said. So is the history you buried under 1,000 hymns. Murmurs rippled. Malric dipped his head. The movement caught perfect. Sire, no one disputes that the past is tangled. But this union of yours... His pale eyes flicked to the priest to his right. High anchor, if you please. High anchor. Palladius rose. Age had thinned his hair, but not his mouth. The latter was a straight, narrow wound. We have deliberated, he intoned, voice designed to carry over crowds. What afflicts our king is not sacrament, but stain. This bond collapsed the sacred balance. The moon's mercy and the wolf's might are meant to stand apart. The woman's presence has fused them into one defiance. Defiance of what? Chael asked softly. Order, the priest said, and there was iron in it, the old vows, the hierarchy set by the first rite. The first rite, Chael said, tasting the words like ash, was written in murder. A hiss went around the room, scandalized, greedy. Malric's gaze was steady, attentive, unblinking the way snakes forget to blink. Whatever the sins of our ancestors, we live with the scaffolding they built. Remove the wrong beam and the kingdom falls. Your people already whisper that you are bewitched. They whisper because you feed them, Chael said. Malric's smile never reached his eyes. I feed them food a starving man will take from anyone. General Voren, all scar and loyalty, cleared his throat. With respect, Your Majesty. Troop captains report strange behavior in the royal pack. They've begun to circle the woman rather than obey handlers. If the priests are right and the lines are cross-sparking, we could lose control of the border wolves before harvest. The Western lords will revolt if their flocks go unguarded. Control, Palladius repeated, as if the word itself were a prayer. Chael's jaw tightened. In the bond's humming, he felt Seren stirring in her chamber, a slow turn in sleep. He had left her, with Captain Idrin at the doormat, and 2 she-wolves drowsing beneath her window by their own decision. The wolves were uneasy with most men. With Seren they were quiet, watchful, careful as monks. Malric folded his hands, lithe fingers knitting. Sire, as your servant I must say what devotion would prefer silence for. The council petitions you to surrender the woman to the temple. We will separate the bond with rites gentler than the last resort, for the safety of all. For the safety of your order, Chael said. It was not anger. It were fact. The chamber tightened, a living thing drawing breath for a strike. Malric bowed a fraction deeper, as if in apology for what he would not apologize for. You are beloved, Your Majesty. You are also one man. The order is the bones of the realm. Chael looked past him to the narrow west windows, where 9 banners hung. The wolf of the north, the hammer of the ironsmiths, the crescent of the river clans. They were beautiful in the light. They were also veils over graves. No, he said. The word was soft. It rang harder than the warped bell. Your Majesty, Palladius began, an undertow already rising. No, Chael repeated. and in the bond Seren's heartbeat steadied, as if his voice had found her across stone. You will not touch her. Then you accept the charge of abomination, Palladius said. You set yourself against the first right. I set myself against a lie, Kael said. Write whatever charge wraps your conscience in sleep. The priest's composure cracked by a hair. Malrix did not. If you refuse mild remedies, the council must protect the crown from itself. Is that a threat? General Voron growled, half rising. Malrix's hands remained folded. It is a notice. The nobility have begun to gather outside the city for prayers. The Domino of Glasmere claims to have seen fires falling from the moon. The Guild of Western Smiths sent word they will not supply the army if the king's witch remains within the palace walls. There it was, the hinges of power squealing as someone else tried them. Kael nodded once, not in agreement, but as if he had found the exact location of the rot. Then I will remove your excuse. He turned, the mantle at his shoulders flaring like a dark wing, and left them with their rings and incense and frightened math. Malrix's voice followed silk over wire. For the realm, Majesty. For the realm, Kael said without looking back. I will keep her alive. By dusk, the city's whispers had swollen into rumor into shape. Noble coaches rattled through the gatehouse like beetles in lacquer. Temple bells traded off with the tavern drums. A new prayer spread in the alleys, half plea, half curse. Witch Queen, they called her, and blessing, and blight. Inside the keep, Kael moved like a man in water, each step planned 3 ahead. He sent Voron to lock down the barracks, Idrin to ready the ash tunnels, Kestrel, the only thief he'd never managed to hang, to fetch passports from the embassy archives. He ordered the palace wolves loosed and then left to their own choosing. He did not ask the priests for blessing. He'd learned what a blessing from a liar cost. When he reached Seren's door, the she-wolves had already stood. Their eyes met his, unafraid. Idrin lifted the bar and stepped aside. Seren stood in the middle of the chamber with her hands braced on the table, a map unrolled beneath them. She had braided her hair back tight and borrowed a soldier's jerkin that hung too large on her shoulders. Her eyes were clear, though the day had been full of knives. You heard, Kaelo said. Some words don't need ears, she answered. They come through walls. He crossed to her. Close smelled like cedar smoke and the faint iron of a blade honed clean. We leave at moonrise, he said. If we go before the city sleeps, we'll wake it. If we go after, the eyes that matter will be busy counting my treason. And if we stay, they will take you. He did not soften it. She would not want him to. Or take my crown and then take you. A smile ghosted her mouth without landing. You forget option 3. What is option 3? We take their fear away. Kael huffed a breath that almost became laughter. I intend to. He tapped the map. Through the ash tunnels to the river gate, then north along the frost flats. The Vale ruins will hide us better than any monastery. There are caves up there, even the map makers pretend don't exist. The Vale, she said softly, and the word woke something old in the room. The way a childhood name slips into a prayer. My ancestors were hunted there. They will guard you there now, he said, and did not ask how he knew. The bond had shifted from ache to intuition, a current he could lean into like a strong wind. She slid a glance toward the window slit, where the sky had begun to brew, so I'd bite. Your council will not forgive this. I am not doing it for their forgiveness. For what then? For breath, Kael said simply. For a future that does not require a grave before a wedding. Seren's throat moved. After a beat, she nodded. Then let us be sacrilegious and alive. They left, dressed as servants. Idrin led, blades hidden in the lay of her cloak. Kael followed with the hood drawn low, the weight of a plain pack biting at his shoulders. Seren moved between them, like a shadow that had put on skin. The ash tunnels were older than the palace, a ribcage of stone and cold air that emptied beyond the river gate into a stand of birches. Wolves slipped in and out of the party's steps, never quite touching, always near, grey shapes with night coin eyes. At the last grate, Kestrel knelt with a halo of lockpicks and smirk. You ask a man to choose between treason and boredom, he muttered. You've made your choice for him. The lock sighed open. He vanished back into dark with a wink that meant debts and friendship. They came out into the birches like wrong-born deer. Above, the moon was not yet full, but brighter than law. The city's outer walls were a black curve to their right. Beyond, the plains ran pale to the first rise of the mountains. A wind carried cold and the flavor of coming snow. No horns, no alarm. Only the quickened hush that falls when a storm stands up somewhere you cannot see. They walked until the river shouldered up to them, thick and quiet under the moon. Kael kept them to the flood path, boot leather taking on the wet. Twice he paused and set a hand to Seren's shoulder. Not because she faltered, but because the bond tugged, the way a tether pulls when a boat must adjust for a current it cannot see. Once, wolves moved out from the bank and trotted ahead, clearing the deer off the path as flippantly as couriers clearing a hall. Idrin regarded them with the sideways respect soldiers keep for saints. They don't do that for priests, she muttered. They're not doing it for me, Seren said. As if that solved anything. Maybe it did. By dawn, the city lay low behind them like a closed eye. The mountains rose. They ate river-cold bread and the last of the summer apples. Kael slept in fits, waking each time to find Seren watching the line of the horizon as if reading words written there in a light he couldn't see. By the second night, they reached the vale. It was not a single ruin, but a field of them, stone ribs jutting from the earth, where a city had once sat breathing. Moonflower vines trailed over broken lintels. Wolves slept in the half-buried arches like monks in cloisters. The wind sounded different here. Not thinner, not thicker. Truer somehow. As if mountains don't have to lie. This was a courtyard, Seren murmured, palm on a more soft wall. A place where they sang before rites. They hung lamps in those hooks, see? The light would have looked like fallen stars. Kael saw only rusted hooks and stone. But in her voice he could hear the lamps. He set camp in a hollow back from the open. Idrin took the narrow invisible paths and laid traps and warnings a bare foot could not find, but a boot heel always would. Wolves settled themselves like stones that breathe, just far enough to give the humans the illusion of privacy. That night, Seren stood at the lip of the ruin and lifted her hand. Moonfire gathered to her palm, not the searing, devouring blaze of battle, but a slow, pale radiance that opened like a white flower. It spilled over the broken courtyard, washing the stones in a sheen older than the crown. Kael watched with something between hunger and prayer. Close your eyes, she said without looking at him. He did. Heat brushed his face as soft as breath. He felt the bond locate him the way a hawk finds a current. An instinct, a homecoming. His heartbeat steadied into a rhythm he did not know he had missed since childhood, before priests and rules and the tight collar of a gold circlet. He felt the wolf inside him lie down, not tamed, not chained, but Basul at last, beside something it recognized. When he opened his eyes, the ruin was not less broken. It was more alive. Wolves padded forward and knelt to Seren, pressing noses to her hand, to her knee, to the hem of her cloak. At her smallest gesture, they turned as one and bounded outward, scattering in a pattern that, if seen from above, would have been a sigil dropped across the night. Idrin swore under her breath, "You're calling them from miles." Seren lowered her hand. Sweat shone at her temple, but her eyes were steady. "They come because they want to, not because they have to. Freedom can be a strategy," Kayla murmured. And it was not entirely to her. Word traveled faster than wolves. On the third night, mountain villagers arrived with bread and news. The Dominar had ridden out of Glassmere with a retinue and a cask of Vempel oil. The Guild of Western Smiths had barred their doors to the crown's coin. 3 minor lords had left offerings at the temple for the king's deliverance. "And the city?" Kael asked. "Quiet," said the oldest woman, spitting into the fire. "Like a cat watching birds." Idrin's mouth flattened, which means blades being counted in the rooms with no windows. Kael thanked them and sent them home with salt, and a promise he could not afford to break. When he turned, he found Seren watching him with the look of someone memorizing a sunrise she fears will not come again. "What?" he asked. "You do not flinch from the cost," she said. "I hear it tallying every hour." He replied, "That is not the same as paying it with you." Something in her went soft at the edges. It was not surrender. It was trust, which is harder. They trained each afternoon in the dead courtyard. Seren learned to pull moonfire through her body without letting it flood her veins. Kael learned how to set his wolf between her and the burn, to take the heat and ground it into stone. He bled once, palms raw and smoking after he caught a too-hot surge, and she grabbed his forearms with a curse that would have scandalized a bishop, the bond shrieking like a plucked wire. "Don't," she whispered, eyes bright and wet. "Don't you dare!" "It's only skin," he said, smiling because the alternative was to say the too true thing in his mouth. She bound his hands in linen strips steeped in mountain mint. The pain eased. The ache did not. That evening, the wind shifted. The metallic tang that means a storm is licking its chops. Idrin returned from the ridgeline with her hair full of lightning and a message grim as iron. The Shadow Court had been seen south of the pass, riding with temple banners borrowed to Daburat for cover. Malrik's men with priests in tow. A long knife with 2 hands on the hilt. "They'll try the veil first," Idrin said. "They'll want to seize the witch clean and blame the mountain folk for hiding her." Seren's mark brightened under her cloak. "Let them try." Idrin grinned like a wolf. Kael did not. He waited until the wolves had done a last circuit, and Idrin had slipped out to plant more quiet teeth in the path. Then he found Seren at the ruin's edge, moon on her face, wind whirring at the stray hairs she had not noticed escaping their braid. He stood close enough that the bond hummed low between them, an instrument tuned by ache and oath. For a long moment he said nothing. He listened to the mountain breathe, to the river soaring at its bed far below, to the far cry of a night bird that had no time for kings. "I was born to protect the throne," he said finally. The words tasted like old metal, familiar, heavy, inherited. Seren turned her face until the moon made a blade of her profile. When she looked at him, there was fire and gentleness in equal measure. "Then protect me instead." The bond flared. Pain, relief, something holy. Kael closed his eyes, and for the first time since boyhood, the weight of the crown in his mind shifted from a shackle to a promise he wanted to keep. The mountains kept their secrets in silence. For weeks, the wind howled over the vale and snow fell in restless drifts. But within the ruins, firelight carved a fragile world of warmth and breath. Seren and Kael live in the rhythm of survival, gathering water from frozen streams, mending wolf pelts into cloaks, speaking only when words refused to be contained. Exile had stripped them bare of rank and reason, leaving only the bond pulsing between them, raw, inexorable, alive. At first, Kael thought he could master it. He told himself the bond was a thing of will, a chain that could be ignored if he refused to look too closely. But every dawn betrayed him. When he woke, the frost had melted where her sleeping body lay. When she dreamed, he felt the tremor of it under his skin. Their heartbeats no longer moved in parallel. They had merged, two tides drawn by the same moon. Seren felt the change before he admitted it. Each night, as the fire dwindled and Kael's strength faded, hers surged. The moonfire within her grew steadier, easier to call. Wolves gathered closer to her light, their golden eyes fixed on her as if remembering something divine. But her joy was hollowed by dread, for she could feel what it cost him. He was burning from the inside out. One evening, Kael trained in the courtyard, blade flashing through the blue dusk. His breath frosted in the cold air. Sweat streaked his temples. Each movement came slower than the last. The sword slipped once, biting into the stone pillar instead of striking true. The mark on his chest flared, a dying star. Seren was there before he could hide it. "Enough," she said, voice low but unyielding. "I'm fine," he replied, though his vision flickered. "You're lying." The words cracked the air like frost splitting rock. He froze, sword half raised. The bond pulsed hard enough to ache. She took a step forward, the fire's reflection burning silver in her eyes. "You think I don't feel it? Every time you bleed, I burn. Every time you weaken, I—" She stopped, shaking her head. "You're giving it to me, your strength." "It's the curse," he said. "The bond drains the alpha to feed the lunar. That's how it was built." "And you'll let it?" Her voice was soft, dangerous. "You'll let the curse eat you alive to prove what? That you can protect me while dying for it." "I was born for that purpose," Kael said. The words were a wound reopening. "To be king. To bear the blood price if I must." Seren's expression broke. Anger and grief, light and shadow. "You were born to be free. You just don't remember what that means." She reached for him, her hand hovering over the mark. The warmth radiating from her skin sank through his ribs like mercy disguised as fire. The pulse steadied, hers and his, as if the world itself held its breath. "Then let me carry it too," she whispered. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he leaned his forehead against hers. For a heartbeat, one they shared, the curse forgot itself. Exile has a way of blurring time. Some nights they spoke, others they didn't need to. Kale would tell her of his mother, how she used to braid his hair before dawn drills, how she hummed an old lullaby about a white stag that never bowed. Seren would answer with stories of the veil before it fell, the silver gardens, the moonlit pools where wolves and women once shared songs instead of wars. Their words built a bridge between ghosts. Sometimes they trained together. Seren practiced summoning moonfire without consuming herself. Kael taught her to channel it through movement, to weave power with precision. When her light wavered, his voice steadied her. When he faltered, her hand on his chest brought him back. Each lesson left the air thicker with things neither dared name. Once, as they stood close by the fire, she whispered, "Does it frighten you that the bond feels like love?" Kael's gaze met hers, sharp as steel. "It frightens me that I don't know the difference anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was glutual of heartbeat, of firelight, of the slow surrender of two people who had already been claimed by something larger than their fear. But peace never lingers long in a cursed kingdom. Far beyond the mountains, Malric Thorn moved like a serpent through smoke. At first, his messages were whispers, letters carried by falcons, silver seals marked with the sigil of the Shadow Court. To the noble houses, he promised purification. To the lesser alphas, he promised freedom from the king's madness. To the priests, he promised divine order restored. And beneath every vow lay the same hunger, power reclaimed through fear. He stood before the gathered alphas in the black citadel, torchlight reflecting in the polished obsidian walls. Around him, banners of every bloodline hung, a parliament of predators. "The curse has spread," Malric declared, his voice smooth as oil. "Our wolves kneel to a witch. The Alpha King has defied the moon's will and allowed her to poison our kind." The crowd murmured, low growls, sharp breaths, the sound of order fraying. Malric lifted a hand, feigning sorrow. "We must act before the bond consumes what remains of our strength. The moon rises red again. Do you not see it? The blood moon comes early. It is a warning and a call." They roared their assent, and in the farthest corner, cloaked priests of the old faith began to chant. Their words echoed against the black stone, the rhythm of ancient cruels returning home. In the vale, Kael woke gasping from dreams he could not outrun. In one, the moon hung like a blade over a burning city. In another, wolves turned on their own shadows. Always, he woke to Seren's hands holding his face, her eyes glowing with borrowed strength. "You saw it again," she said one night. He nodded. "The blood moon. It's coming sooner than it should." "How soon?" "Days, maybe less. The sky already bleeds at dusk." Seren closed her eyes. "Then the Shadow Court will come with it." Kael reached for her hand, tracing the faint silver veins, now visible under her skin. "They'll come for you." "They'll come for us," she corrected. "The bond makes us one." He smiled faintly, though the color had drained from his lips. "Then we'll make them regret ever forging it." He tried to stand, but his strength faltered again. Seren caught him. For the first time, he didn't pull away. "You can't keep fighting it," she said. "Every heartbeat we share feeds me what it takes from you." "It's a fair trade," he said. "Don't you dare call this fair." She snapped. "You're fading, Kyle." "I'm learning," he corrected softly. "That power isn't keeping the throne standing. It's knowing what you die to protect." Seren's voice broke. "Then live for it instead." He smiled again, tired and tender. "That's not what kings are built for." "Then be something better than a king," she whispered. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind outside, carrying the faint, distant echo of wolves howling in a direction neither could see. 3 nights later, the first storm broke. The mountains shuddered under thunder that rolled like drums of war. The wolves in the valley howled not from fear, but from recognition. Lightning split the clouds, and in the flash that followed, the moon appeared, red and full before its time. Seren stood at the edge of the ruins, rain streaming down her face, her mark burning brighter than ever. The power inside her surged, wild and uncontainable, feeding on the storm's pulse. Kael stood behind her, one hand pressed to his chest, fighting to stay upright as his knees buckled beneath the weight of the bond. "It's too soon," she said, her voice breaking in the wind. "The blood moon shouldn't rise yet." Kael's breath came ragged. "It's been called forward. Malric's doing. The ritual. They must be forcing the cycle." The ground trembled, as if the world itself had taken a breath it couldn't release. Far below, the wolves began to howl, not in chaos, but in unity. One by one the calls joined, forming a single haunting note that filled the night. Seren felt it deep in her bones, the awakening of something vast. "They're waiting," she whispered, "all of them, waiting for their true alpha." Kael sank to one knee beside her. "Then they'll have one." Seren turned, rain and moonlight blending on her face like tears of silver. "You can't lead them while you're dying." He smiled faintly. "I'm not dying. I'm remembering what my blood forgot." Above them, the blood moon burned through the storm, red, vast, and alive. Its light touched the ruins, the wolves, the mountains, and finally, the two figures standing at the heart of it all, bound by curse, choice, and love. The howl rose again, shaking the earth. The storm had chosen its side, the reckoning had begun. The mountain night was too still. No wolves sang, no wind whispered. The silence was the kind that came only before blood. Kael felt it before he saw it. The shift in the air, the sharp metallic taste of betrayal. His wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin. "They found us," he said, already reaching for his blade. Seren looked up from the fire where her moonlight flickered faintly against the stone walls of the Vale ruins. Her eyes narrowed. "How?" "Malric's spies. The Shadow Court has always known how to scent power." Then came the horn. A single, low cry that rolled through the mountains like a warning from the dead. The attack struck with surgical precision. From the tree line, silver-tipped arrows rained down, their heads glowing faintly with runes that could pierce even an alpha's skin. The wolves howled in response, fury and confusion, and lunged into the dark, meeting steel with fang. Kael pulled Seren behind him, deflecting an arrow with his sword. "Stay close," But they were surrounded. Dozens of soldiers cloaked in black and silver, the mark of the Shadow Court, emerged from the snow-dusted shadows, their armor etched with the sigils of obedience. Behind them, priests chanted in the old tongue, summoning chains of light from the ground itself. The first of those chains struck Kael's leg, burning through leather and flesh. He roared, the sound shaking loose stones from the ruined walls. His wolf fought to rise, but each chain that struck shimmered with moonlight stolen from the Vale's altar. Seren raised her hands, calling fire. Silver flame erupted, blinding half the enemy line. For a heartbeat, she stood radiant, every inch the Luna reborn. But that was when they revealed their true weapon. A tall figure stepped through the poke. His robes were black, lined with veins of red sigils, his eyes pale as glass. In his hands, he held a blade carved from bone and inked with runes that pulsed with something ancient, something that remembered creation. Malric! Kael spat. The Chancellor smiled, stepping forward as his soldiers bowed. Your Majesty, you've made quite the mess of my inheritance. Kael lunged, but Malric moved with inhuman speed. The bone blade met steel, and the clash split the air with a shriek that rippled through stone and blood alike. You think you inherited a kingdom, Malric said between strikes. You inherited a leash. Kael's blade sparked against his teeth bared. You're the one who forged it. Malric's smile widened. No, my ancestors did. The Thorn bloodline created the curse to bind kings like you, to keep the wolves from devouring their masters. You were never free. You were bred for obedience. Kael's rage flared. But behind him came a sound that froze him mid-step. A scream. He turned in time to see Seren fall, silver chains wrapping around her wrists and throat. The priest's chants crescendoed as they dragged her towards a stone altar, half buried in the mountain ice. The moon altar of the first Vale. Her blood hissed against the runes carved into the stone, lighting them like fire veins. Kael's vision blurred. No! Malric's soldiers held the line as the Chancellor stepped back, observing his masterpiece. It's poetic, really, he murmured, the last of the Vale bloodline dying where her ancestors were slaughtered. Her death will seal the curse anew, and when her light fades, I will command every wolf in this realm. He lifted the bone blade and pressed it against the altar. The runes turned crimson. Seren's mark flared in agony, and her cry echoed like shattering glass. Kael's wolf broke free. The sound he made was no longer human. It was a thunderclap in flesh, a god's wrath loosed through mortal veins. He tore through the Shadow Court ranks, his sword cutting men in half, claws ripping through armor. Every blow brought him closer to her, but every chain that struck sizzled with the power of the curse, burning him from within. Blood steamed in the snow. Wolves from the valley, hearing their alpha's cry, surged into the battlefield. Hundreds of them, eyes blazing gold, fangs gleaming with vengeance. The air itself trembled with their fury. Malric raised his hands. Bind him! The priests obeyed, weaving their chants into a net of light. Kael's wolf staggered as silver cords lashed around his throat, his limbs, his chest. But he didn't stop. He dragged them forward with him, step by agonizing step, each pulse of the bond with Seren feeding him her pain, her strength, her defiance. He reached the altar just as the blade descended toward her heart. Kel caught it with his bare hand. Bone shattered. The backlash knocked both men to the ground. Lightning burst from the altar, searing the night sky. Kael's hand bled freely, the mark of the Alpha glowing white-hot across his chest. "You can't win," Malrik snarled, rising. "The curse lives in your blood. It was built to consume you." Kael's breath came ragged. "Then I'll burn with it." He staggered toward Seren, slashing through the remaining chains with one hand. She fell into his arms, her pulse faint but steady. Her eyes fluttered open. "Kael, stay with me." Her fingers brushed his cheek, leaving a streak of silver light. "You can't fight it much longer. The curse, it's feeding on love." "I know." The moon loomed above them, vast and red, the blood of centuries boiling across its surface. Each beat of Kael's heart tore through his chest, fire spreading through his veins. Malrik stepped forward again, laughing softly. "Do you still not understand? The curse ends when love breaks. Kill her and you live. Keep her and you both die." Kael looked at Seren, her face pale but defiant, and something in him, something beyond human, beyond king, refused. "No," he said. "It ends when we choose it to." Malrik's smile turned venomous. "Then you choose ruin." He drove a final incantation into the air and the ground cracked open. The moon altar blazed with runes written in blood and bone. The power surged, dragging Kael and Seren to their knees. The world tilted, reality bending under the force of the curse reclaiming its price. Kael's body shook, his wolf howling within, half mad from pain. Flames licked at his arms. The mark on his chest split, light pouring from the wound like molten silver. Seren reached for him, her hands trembling. "Kael, look at me." His eyes, once gold, had turned white, reflecting the moon. "Seren, I can't hold it." "Yes, you can." She pressed her forehead to his, her voice fierce through the storm. "If the curse ends when love breaks." Her tears glowed like fire. "Then let it break." Kael's last breath came out as a whisper of the surrender and devotion. The light consumed them both, and for a heartbeat, the blood moon itself flickered. The world had become a wound of light. Seren lay bound to the moon altar, her wrists seared by chains forged in her ancestors' blood. Around her, the battlefield burned. The snow turned black, the wolves howling in grief as Kael's body collapsed beside her. The air reeked of iron and ash. Above them, the blood moon pulsed like a living heart, red and swollen, its light feeding the curse that was killing them both. "Kael," she whispered, voice raw and trembling. No answer, only the faint rise of his chest, shallow and fading. Malrik stood over them, his robe scorched, but his smile serene. "Do you see now, little Luna? Even love cannot unmake the moon's will." Seren lifted her head, eyes blazing through tears. "You don't understand the moon," she said. "You only ever worshipped its shadow." Malrik raised his hand, chanting in the language of the old bloodlines. The altar flared, symbols igniting along its rim. Power surged through the ruins, pressing the air flat against Seren's lungs. Her chains glowed molten red. And then, something inside her answered. A voice rose in her chest. ancient and terrible and kind all at once. The echo of the first Luna, the matriarch whose blood had shaped the world before men learned to speak. It wasn't borrowed power. It was birthright. Her eyes went silver white. Her voice became thunder. The moon does not take what was freely given. She spoke, each word shaking the mountain to its bones. The runes binding her wrists began to crack. The curse ends with the one who dares to love. The shadow court faltered. Their chants broke. Malric stumbled backward, his eyes widening in disbelief. No, that's not possible. But the altar trembled beneath her palms, ancient stone remembering what it had once been. A place of blessing, not bondage. Seren reached for Kael, her fingers trembling as she pressed her bloodied hand to his chest. His mark, the Alpha's crown of flame, flickered weakly beneath her touch. She leaned closer, tears falling like silver rain onto his skin. "Come back to me," she whispered. "If love is our ruin, then let it ruin the curse." The bond flared open like a wound reborn. Their marks ignited, his fading gold, hers blazing silver, and fused into one burning sigil that shimmered between their bodies. The blood moon above them began to pulse faster, its crimson hue paling to white. Malric screamed a word of power and thrust his blade toward them, but the moment the rune-carved bone touched the light, it disintegrated into dust. The force knocked him to his knees, blood pouring from his nose as the altar split beneath them, cracks glowing with molten radiance. Wolves across the valley fell silent. Then, one by one, they began to bow, their heads lowered, their howls swallowed by reverence. Seren felt Kael's heart stutter once, then stop. The bond between them snapped taut, a silver thread stretched across eternity. "No," she breathed, her voice breaking. "Not now, not when the moon listens." She drew on the last of her strength, her blood spilling freely over the altar, tracing symbols she did not remember learning, but had always known. Her tears shimmered as they fell, glowing like fragments of the moon itself. The runes responded. The altar shone brighter than the stars. And then the blood moon exploded. A column of silver fire erupted from the mountain, piercing the heavens. The light swept outward, devouring the crimson sky, washing across every forest, every den, every wolf who had ever been bound by blood or curse. The Shadow Court screamed as the fire reached them. Their armor melted, their voices turned to dust. Malric's last cry was swallowed by the wind as the runes that once marked his bloodline burned away. The silver fire consumed everything impure and spared only what still remembered love. In the heart of it, Kael's body rose slightly from the altar, light coursing through every vein. Seren held him, her arms shaking as she whispered through sobs, "Take me instead. Let him breathe." But the moon had already chosen. The flames began to calm, folding inward until only the altar remained, blackened stone veined with light. Seren collapsed beside him, her chains turned to ash. Her breath came shallow, each one laced with grief and exhaustion. The battlefield was silent now. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb what had been reborn. "Kael," she whispered again, tracing his face with trembling fingers. "Please." For a long moment, nothing. Then, his chest rose. His eyes opened, but they were no longer the gold of the cursed, Alpha bloodline. They shone white, pure and moonlit, reflecting her face and the firelit sky. "Seren," he rasped, voice low and human and infinite. She let out a sob that turned into a laugh, pressing her forehead against his. The bond pulsed, not with pain, but peace. Behind them, the wolves gathered in a circle around the altar. One by one, they knelt. The oldest among them, white as snow, howled softly, the sound low and reverent, the sound of something ancient finally released. Kael lifted his head toward the moon, which now gleamed silver once more. "It's over," he murmured. Seren shook her head faintly. "No," she whispered, smiling through her tears. "It's just beginning." The moon's light poured over them like a blessing, washing away blood, curse, and shadow alike. And in that silver dawn, the Alpha King lived, reborn, not as ruler of wolves, but as their equal. The curse had ended, love had not. Dawn came quietly, not with fanfare, but with breath. The first unbroken breath the realm had taken in centuries. The crimson haze that had haunted the northern skies for generations was gone. In its place, the moon hung pale and gentle, fading into a horizon of gold. The war was over. The curse was dead. Weeks had passed since the blood moon's fire consumed the mountain, yet its echo still lingered in every heartbeat of the land. Rivers ran clear where ash once flowed. The forests regrew from scorched roots. Wolves no longer prowled in fear of their blood, but ran free beneath open skies, their howls now songs of allegiance, not pain. Kael Draven, the Alpha King reborn, walked among them without a crown. The ruins of the capital had been rebuilt not by decree, but by choice. Villagers, soldiers, and once scattered clans returned to a city that no longer smelled of iron and fear. The great marble steps of the palace, once lined with chained wolves, now led to an open courtyard filled with flowers. In the center of that courtyard stood a new monument, the Temple of Balance, carved from the bones of the old moon altar. Its walls shimmered faintly with the same silver light that had once nearly destroyed the world. On the day the temple doors opened, Kael and Seren stood before the gathered crowd, Alpha-born and common-born alike. As the last of the old priests etched a new prophecy into the sanctum's wall, the words glowed briefly, then sank deep into stone. The king who claimed her for one night will spend eternity proving he was worthy. A hush fell over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kael's hand found Seren's, their joined fingers bearing the faint scars of the fused marks. One silver, one gold, glowing softly when touched by the light. "They'll tell the story wrong," he said quietly. Seren smiled. "They always do." "Then how will you tell it?" She looked up at the moon's fading edge and whispered, "Not as a curse undone, but as love reborn." That night, under the first full silver moon since the war, the wolves gathered on the plains beyond the city. Tens of thousands of them. From snow-coated northern packs to the obsidian-furred tribes of the west. They came not to kneel, but to stand. Kael stood before them, cloak swept by the wind, his eyes no longer golden but moonlit white. Seren stood beside him, her presence a quiet fire that warmed the dark. He spoke to them not as their ruler, but as one of their own. The curse made us forget what we were, he said, voice carrying across the endless field. It taught us that power was domination, that strength meant obedience, but we were never meant to be chained. Not by men, not by gods, not even by the moon, she. The wolves raised their heads, listening. Seren stepped forward, her voice like wind through leaves. You are free. Not because the bond was broken, but because it was shared. Remember that balance is not weakness. The wild in you is not something to be feared. It is your birthright. A low chorus of howls answered her, swelling into a symphony that rolled across the night like thunder. The realm, for the first time, sang in harmony with itself. Later, in the quiet of the temple, Kael stood alone before the altar where once he'd bled and burned. The stone was cold now, smooth beneath his fingertips. He closed his eyes. For the first time in his life, there was silence in his wolf. No hunger, no curse, no rage, only peace. Behind him, Seren's footsteps echoed softly. She came to stand beside him, a candle in hand. You still visit this place, she said gently. I have to, he replied. It reminds me what I almost lost. She smiled faintly. You didn't lose me. Kael turned to her, his eyes soft. I did once, and that's enough to never forget. She set the candle on the altar. Its flame burned silver, reflecting in both their scars. The old kings ruled through fear, she said. You rule through remembrance. He took her hand again, tracing the twin marks where their bond had fused. No, we rule through love. Seasons changed. The northern snows melted earlier that year, and the first spring flowers bloomed beneath the castle walls, blue, the color of the old Val sigil. In every village, the people spoke of the eternal bond, not as legend, but as the moment the realm learned to live again. The council was gone. The thrones of the Shadow Court were empty. The wolves, once symbols of terror, became guardians of the borders and allies to the people. The balance between man and beast, alpha and luna, crown and heart, restored. Children born under the new moon carried faint crescent birthmarks on their palms, a sign that the moon now blessed life instead of claiming it. And though Kael and Seren ruled together, they abolished the titles of Alpha and Luna too. In their place, they created a single vow shared by all leaders: to serve, not to own; to love, not to bind. Years later, as the moon reached its zenith during the Festival of Light, Kael and Seren stood once more upon the temple steps. Their people gathered below, wolves at their sides, lanterns swaying in the breeze. Seren turned to Kael, her face radiant in the silver glow. Do you remember that night? She asked. He chuckled softly. Which one? The one where I nearly killed you, or the one where you saved me? The one where you claimed me, she said with a teasing smile. Kael's gaze softened at the thought it would be one night. She leaned closer. It was eternity beginning. As the moonlight touched their joined hands, the twin scars across their skin flared to life, gold and silver weaving together, forming a single living light. The crowd gasped, and every wolf howled in unison, not in sorrow, but in celebration. Above them, the moon seemed to shimmer brighter, as if the heavens themselves acknowledged the truth written in both blood and legend. They said the Alpha King claimed her for one night. But when the dawn rose, he'd already begun spending eternity trying to keep her.